All right, hello and welcome to the KeyShot 7 preview webinar. My name is Rex Roberts and I'm the lead user experience designer here at Luxion. For the first half of today's webinar, I'll be showing off some KeyShot 7 user interface updates, workflow enhancements, and the brand new KeyShot Configurator. I'll be swapping presentation duties about halfway through the webinar with our global training manager, Richard Funnell, for him to go over some huge improvements we've made to new materials, texture mapping, labels, the environment tab, and the HDRI editor. There are so many new features and improvements in KeyShot 7 that we can't possibly cover it all in 1 hour, but we'll make sure to leave some time at the end to answer any outstanding questions that we're not able to answer during the webinar. As always, a recording of this webinar will be available at youtube.com/KeyShot3D for you to reference as you explore KeyShot 7 for yourself. If you are not already a part of our beta program and are interested in testing and providing feedback on KeyShot 7, go ahead and send an email to beta@luxion.com and we'll get you set up. We haven't finalized a release date yet, but we're expecting to officially launch KeyShot 7 by the end of next month, so July 2017. Very exciting. All right, so now that you've had some time to soak in the UI that I have on screen now and some of the surface level changes, let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are some of the UI enhancements. The initial impression, you might notice the styling has been updated a little bit. We have the light theme on screen here. We've also updated the dark theme, and those can be quickly accessed through our workspaces drop-down menu here. I'll talk about workspaces a little more in detail later, but we can quickly access those themes, those styles, and change that up to match your other CAD applications or your other photo editing applications. In a similar way, we can right-click in the canvas area here and change this background very quickly to really dial it in for our display and the scene we're working with, so we can make those changes very quickly. If we take a look up here at the ribbon, you may notice some changes. We've done a little reordering and regrouping of the icons and buttons here to follow a more logical sense. And we've also added the text on the ribbon. So we can hide that text just by right-clicking if we want to clean things up a bit. You notice when I do that, we also get a menu for each of the individual ribbon icons. So you can go in and hide and show the icons that you find yourself using most often, and really dial in that UI so it's clean and fits your workflow. So in my case, since I'm on a desktop, maybe I won't use the tumble, pan, and dolly. I find that is more useful when working on a laptop with a trackpad. And many of these items have hotkeys. So when I'm working, I tend to actually hide a lot of these because I end up using the hotkeys with them, and helps clean things up and just remove some distractions. So in addition to the changes we made to the ribbon, we've also made some changes in the main panels here. So we can, just like the ribbon, hide and show text. Actually, we've had that in the past. But if you notice, when I right-click, we also have the option to hide the individual tabs here. So if you don't use favorites or colors, you can hide those and really clean it up. In addition to hiding individual tabs, we can also tear off tabs. So I can just click and drag to tear off my scene tab if I want those object highlights to be visible at all times. And we can dock these guys next to each other, or however you like to set that up. We can also reorder tabs, so I find that it makes a little more logical sense to have the camera first, then the environment, and you can really just set this up to how you please. And workspaces actually save all these interface configurations, so you can create your own custom workspace that works best for you and save that as a workspace. So we have some pre-populated workspaces here, such as just the default that you're all used to here, which is how KeyShot 6 started up, with your library on the left and your project on the right. I've created one for myself, so I find this works well to have very few icons on the ribbon, to have my project window next to, or my scene window next to the rest of my project window here. But for the purposes of this webinar, I'll just stick to the default, as most of you guys are using this kind of setup here. So some more UI updates. We have some small stuff here in the scene tree. You may notice we have some different icons for visibility, so this makes it very clear what objects are visible, what objects are hidden, and then there's another state if you have combined hidden and shown objects within one group here. If we drill down to the part level and hover over the part, we can see we have these quick little previews. So this can be really helpful if you have a multi-body part that has all the same name and you're quickly trying to find that part. You can do that referencing these preview tooltips. Another really cool addition to the UI is we've now added units in all of the unit aware value fields. So here under rounded edges, you can see the scene is set to inches, and we now know that that radius respects those scene units. And that goes for environment properties as well, camera properties, and the new materials, or the updates to the new materials that Richard will be talking about a little later. And the last kind of thing that I wanted to talk about as far as UI is some optimizations we've made to font scaling. So right now I'm working on a 1920 by 1080 display, but right next to me I have a 4K display. So I'm just going to quickly show that screen. And I have my font scaling turned up to 150%, which is the recommended setting for that display. And if I drag KeyShot over to that display, you can see that the font scaling updates and is now actually legible on these higher resolution displays. So I think those of you working on high resolution displays with font scaling enabled will really appreciate these optimizations we've made. And I'll just bring it back over and show my other screen again. All right, so next let's move on to some of the workflow enhancements that we've made in KeyShot 7. Before I mention that many of these ribbon icons actually have hotkeys, and some of these hotkeys are brand new. So actually the Move tool has a new hotkey, which can be super helpful. If I just hover over a part, I can press the hotkey for that to access that that command. And just like in KeyShot 6, you can press K to bring up the hotkey window here and get an overview of the hotkeys that you have set up. You can also go into Preferences and completely customize all of the hotkeys you have set up in KeyShot. And we've also added some preset camera controls to match your CAD presets. So if you're working in SolidWorks and you're used to navigating the camera, how it's done in SolidWorks, you can set that here in KeyShot so that the two applications match. Okay, going into kind of some scene enhancements. We now have something called adaptive performance mode. So if your machine isn't quite as powerful as maybe this one is, and you find it lagging a little bit when moving around. So right now I have set to 36 cores, but for example, if I drop this down to 2 cores, it gets a little sluggish here. So with the adaptive performance mode, we should actually see as I move around, we kind of disable some of these more CPU hogging settings here and just make it a little quicker to navigate around your scene. If we go back to the scene tree here, when we have an object selected, we can see there's a new accordion for tessellate. So we have two options under here. We can re-tessellate a part. In the past, you've had to re-import if you wanted to adjust the tessellation on a part, but now I can just click that button in here or right-click in the real-time view, and we get a new dialog here where you can actually adjust the tessellation and preview what that looks like. So that can be super helpful if you're doing a close-up shot and you notice some jagged edges. You don't want to re-import that entire model. You can just adjust that one part where you're seeing those issues. And that is, we do require NURBS to be imported in order to use that retessellate. NURBS is a pro feature. And another option here in KeyShot 7 is the ability to always render as NURBS. So again, if you're doing a close-up shot and you notice some faceting on a single part, you can just render that single part with NURBS so you're not hogging up all the CPU, and improves the render time a little bit rather than rendering the entire scene with NURBS enabled. Another nice improvement we made under preferences, you're able to specify a default startup scene. So I've done that, and I can just open up a new KeyShot scene, and I have kind of a startup pre-populated with some cameras, some environments, some units. So then when I import a new model, I can just drop it in, quickly assign my materials, and then I already have those cameras populated in there. I have some environments already in my scene. So this can be super helpful if you're working with the same size objects over and over again, and you want that consistency with lighting and camera angles. All right, so you may have noticed before I just collapsed this little sidebar here. So this is brand new in KeyShot 7, and this is how we're now displaying model sets. So in KeyShot 6, we had a concept called scene sets, and this is very similar to that, but now we've kind of uncovered them. Before they were hidden down here at the bottom of the scene tree. Now we've dedicated a space for those model sets to be presented, and we're even giving you the option to create a thumbnail so you can quickly see what's contained in that model set. So I think this is going to be a huge workflow improvement. And so how this works is, let's see, for example, maybe I want to add a ground plane in here, so I'm just going to hit Control-G, super quick hotkey to just add my ground plane in there. So you can see that's now populated in my default model set. And there's a couple ways to add model sets. I could right-click on that object that I want to add to a new model set, and I can say Create Model Set from Selection. I'll call this the ground, say OK, and now I have a new model set with just that ground plane in there. I can quickly render that preview so I have an accurate representation of what's contained in that model set. We can make more than one model set active at a time. So we can actually separate out these parts into different model sets, and that provides the benefit of combining them in studios and in the configurator, which I will go over in a little bit. So yeah, maybe in this case I want to have one model set with the drone kind of in this flying configuration and one maybe landed. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set this ground to always visible. I know that I want that ground plane to be visible in all of my model sets. So here we have the default, which I'll call this flying. And then I can create a new model set, and I'll call this landed. And I want to include hidden objects so that I can make some adjustments to this one. Let's see, for example, let's see, I didn't get my other landing gears here, so I want this landing gear down. I'll just quickly copy that over to landed so that now I can show that landing gear down, hide and lock this one. So then now I can quickly toggle between those two model sets. And let's go ahead and create a studio for each of those model sets. So maybe I want a different camera angle, a different lighting environment for each of those. So if we go back to flying, I like the look of this hero environment here. Maybe I'll just adjust my camera a little bit and save that. And then we can bring up the Studios panel, so you can access that here from the ribbon. And what you can do here is you can combine your camera, environment, model sets, and multi-materials. So if I just click the Add Studio, I can say this is called Flying. And I'm just going to enable my model sets there. So now we have indicated that we have the camera saved, the environment, and the model sets all saved in this studio. And then if I want to go and create a new one for the one that is landed, I can make that model set active. Maybe I'll change my camera and add a new environment. So you notice that the environment tab is a little different. Richard will be covering this in his section in a little bit. But so what I want to do is maybe just add a new environment here. Maybe I'll change the background color. Give it a rotation. Adjust some of the settings. And then I can go ahead and create another studio. And this is for landed. So now we can quickly toggle between those two studios and really combine those project elements and quickly, make them active and change between them if we want to render out some final images there. All right, so let's move on into the last section of my presentation here, which is the configurator wizard, or rather the configurator. So I do have a scene that I've already set up. As you can see, there are some model sets here. So I have a couple different cars, a few different wheels. If I open the studios window, you can see we have some studios already created. Actually, let's see, I wanted to use this file. So yeah, we have a few different studios, which in this case just contain the environment. And then we have the configurator wizard button here. And this brings up this kind of wizard dialog that leads you step by step through the process of creating your configurator. So the KeyShot Configurator is a tool that enables interactive product presentations of model and material variations in real time. So this allows you to, present these real-time design reviews and make design decisions with your team in this kind of full-screen, touch-friendly format. So if we just go through the configurator, go through these steps, we want to present model and material variations. We've set up our parent models, so in this case that's the two cars I have here. We have our components, which are the three different wheels. We've created the relationships between those components and the parent models. So I have my two cars. At any point through this process, we can preview these different options that we've set up. We have some material variations. So these are created through what are called multi-materials, and these are a super awesome feature that I think is useful for more than just the configurator. And the way these works is if I just double click on this body material here, we can see that we have the multi-material active for this part, and this is basically a container that we can use to hold all these different material variations for a single material, so in this case the main panels. And then we have the option to display studios, so those three environments that I've created. And then we have some options for layout, so you can really adjust this so it works well for your display. And we even give access to the style sheet, so if you want to use your company kind of colorways, you can do that here. And then finally we have a summary of everything we have. We can preview all of these options, and then we can go into presentation mode. Once you have a configurator set up, this presentation mode button will show on the toolbar here, so you can access that presentation mode either way. And now we'll go into full screen, and we can move our model around. We can view our different model options. We can change the environment if we want to see it in a different light setup. We can adjust our wheels, and we can change all of these materials here. So maybe I want this to be a red version. Change the side panels and make sure the wheels match. So I think this is a super powerful tool and really a paradigm shift in the way that you'll be able to present your designs and work with your team to make design decisions. So I'm super excited about This feature, along with the UI enhancements that we've made, some of those workflow improvements, and I'm just going to go ahead and pass this over to Richard to talk about the new materials, the environments, textures, labels, and whatever else he wants to cover. Thank you.
Okay, so what we're going to be talking about is some of the updates in regards to new material types, some new library assets as well, and then some improvements that we're making on textures and labels. So we'll get through as much of this as we can. Similar to Rex, we've got a lot to cover, so we're just going to go ahead and hop into it and start addressing it. So I just pulled in a quick model. Right now these just have some diffuse materials applied to them, so a little kind of key ring, and you can see that my units are here in millimeters. So I haven't customized anything from the UI so far on this. This is the pretty fresh install. So let's talk a little bit about some of the new material types that we have. So here in my material library, we've gone through and we've updated pretty much all of the materials in the library. So in KeyShot 7, we're going to be doing a better job of supporting units for a lot of materials that do rely on units for some of the photorealistic aspects of them. And so pretty much everything we've gone through and updated, improved, or adjusted, sample counts, textures, things like that. So most of the materials that you see in the library are one-to-one replacements for what was in your existing KeyShot 6 library. So everything's going to be new. We're going to be putting everything that was in the KeyShot 6 library into the cloud if you want it. So if there are any environments that you miss, then you'll be able to just pull those directly from the cloud. But we do have a whole new set of assets for you here in the library. So let's talk about some of the new materials that we're showcasing here. So for example, let's take a look in our plastic folder. So a lot of you out there are working with plastic materials, whether they're clear or shiny or cloudy or soft. There are a lot of different kinds in here. So what I want to focus on here for just a second is working with cloudy plastic. So this is a new material type for us. So I'll just throw one on and let's just get a shiny cloudy plastic. Let's grab a purple one and apply it on this material here. And let's go ahead and double click on this and let's talk a little bit about some of the material properties. So if you'll notice, we have a new plastic cloudy material type. So what this material type is actually replicating is a material that has the ability to have very small particles embedded in that material. And so the light is actually going to be scattered when it hits this material. So I'll zoom in here on this material and let it res up for just a second. So you can see generally we have a few sliders that control our basic parameters. So transparency distance is really similar to what we had in KeyShot 6. And that this is going to be the color that you see within some distance. And what we're actually making out here, if I set that down to 1, we'll be able to see more color on the thicker materials. What you'll also notice here is that in the parts that are thicker, we're getting more cloudiness. So if I decrease this cloudiness parameter, that material is now more transparent. So we can see through more of it here. But the cloudiness is a true volumetric cloudiness. So if you're working with plastics, and you're not getting the exact results you need from a translucent material or a basic plastic in KeyShot, even with a translucent material, the cloudy plastic is going to be a really nice addition because it is going to be based off of real life parameters, and the material type itself is going to include that cloudiness slider, which is pretty cool. We can also add some surface roughness to it as well. So it's a fully texturable material. It's also you can control the cloudiness color itself. So when light hits the inside of that surface and then kind of scatters, you can choose the cloudiness colors as well as the directionality. So what direction that light actually scatters when it hits the material. So you've got some in here as a starting point. So here, for example, here's a polypropylene. And if I let that just res up for a second, this is going to give you a material appearance that's really hard to replicate in KeyShot 6. So this brand new cloudy plastic material type is a big update for us, and I'll just throw on an STL type material. So again, we're going to get that cloudy plastic, and if you follow us on social media, you may have seen some kind of teaser images, and there should be some on our forum as well. I'll hide my real-time view here just for a second, show you my background. So this really gorgeous image was made by John Seymour, and that's what the cloudy plastic is going to look like when it's fully rendered out. So that's a really great example of the cloudy plastic in use right there. So totally new material type, which is a really interesting one, and it's going to give you a lot more control, and it'll fill that gap in between your plastics and your translucent materials. So really exciting update to the materials there is just that cloudy plastic. Okay, so let's talk about some other material types that we are updating. So metals, that's another one to talk about. So what I'll do here is I'll just go into my basic folder and let's grab just a really simple chrome. So this is often a really good starting point. So if I take a look at this chrome material, you'll notice that if I double click on it, we now have the ability to define a complex refraction index, or index of refraction for our metal materials. So previously in KeyShot 6, whenever you dragged on a chrome material or brass, what it would do is it would simply define the metal material using a color. However, that's not as accurate because metals are truly defined by a complex IOR instead of just a simple one. So what we can now do is we can load in complex IOR files. So you can see here we can bring in .ior, .nk, and IOR values as CSV files as well. So if I change that to chromium, what we're doing is we're using the actual element itself, which has been measured to give us the appearance that we're looking for, which is really neat. And you can see here we have a drop down of the different material types. So magnesium or titanium, if I change this to titanium, you'll see that that material is going to take on the appearance of titanium. And where you can see that as well is something like aluminum. Aluminum doesn't necessarily just have a simple material color. You start to see some color depending on the shape of your geometry as well. So that's really exciting because you can just use the drop down here to change the material type itself, or all of the materials for the metals in the material library are going to include the actual predetermined material type, or the complex IOR type there. So that's a start. So new metals are going to be a really good addition if your workflow revolves around metals at all. A next thing that we have on those. So what I'll do here is I'll just go back to a basic aluminum because I want to show you what this is going to look like. If I grab an aluminum rough material and I apply it, so this is just our aluminum material and it's got a roughness value of 0.01. If you do work with a measured IOR, what you can do is you can check this anodized checkbox. And this is really interesting as well because what this actually replicates is a true anodized coating on your materials. So here you can see we actually can control some of the variables for that clear coating. So for example, our refractive index, the extinction coefficient, which is generally going to control the absorption or how dark that color is going to get. And then we can control the thickness of that anodized coating. So you'll notice we're still basing this material type on aluminum, but we're actually getting variations in color based off of defining the properties themselves of the material through this anodized coating. So that's a really interesting update as well. So you'll notice here in our anodized folder, so for example, some of these, let's say polished anodized finishes, here's an anodized purple. And it's not just purple, as you can kind of see here. It also is getting a little bit of blue and other colors, and that's because of the real anodization, that clear coat that we're getting on top of our metal materials. And you'll notice that we have some aluminums. We also have some other elements as well. So if we were to anodize some titanium and specify these properties, then that's what we'd actually get for that titanium finish. So that's pretty exciting. All of these as well are going to be, if they have textured variants, then those textures are going to be replicated through the use of procedural textures, not image-based textures, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But that's a pretty exciting update as well, so I just wanted to share some of those details with the metals. So I'll just go ahead and throw on a really simple chrome here. Those of you who work with chrome a lot and have the issue of your chrome totally blowing out, this is also going to help out with that. Another material type that I want to focus on down here in the library. So again, almost all of these materials have had something updated with them. So for example, our hard plastics, we now have a textured option. So if I zoom in on it, those of you who are using procedural textures, and I zoom way in, you'll notice that that plastic material, aside from having its basic properties defined, is also going to have some pre-added textures. For example, some procedural noise. So when you're looking for that real, that true realism in your materials, then you can start pulling in some of these textured materials. A new classification for plastics is also, we have an optical characteristic, or an optical, I guess, group here. So we have a polycarbonate, for example, and this does include dispersive variants on those materials as well. So you'll notice this is a plastic. Well, it's defined as a plastic. It's a dielectric material, and it has all the right values to give you your dispersive properties, as well as like a truly clear polystyrene, for example. So some changes in there in additions. Pretty much any material that we could replicate with a procedural texture is now defined using a procedural texture. Additionally, all of the textures should include size as well, and we'll get to that with the texturing. Another one I want to mention here, because it does get into the textures, is if I change this to a procedural texture, you'll notice that these are going to work a lot better as well. So for example, here we now have, if I double click on it, so this is based off of a plastic material, but we're using a wood material or a wood texture procedurally defined, and it's using real life scale. So here you can see that we have this these different variations and these different kind of types of wood, and they're going to be based off of procedural textures, which are really nice because they're going to seamlessly wrap on your entire model. So not having to worry about seams is a really, really good thing. So here you can see those mapped together. Also, I briefly want to mention, while we're talking about textures, a huge addition in KeyShot 7 is the ability to base your textures on either the model itself or the part. So take a look at these two parts that I have here. You'll notice that right now the default functionality is that the texture is based on the model itself. If I just toggle that over to part though, now if I double click on one of these parts and go back to the textures and use my move tool, that this texture is being defined on this single part. And what's nice about that is, since that other object includes, or this other object here has a linked material, now that same texture is being independently projected on both of those individual parts, which is pretty awesome. So before you'd have to, unlink those and then reposition them, but now these two parts are going to share the same material properties, but the actual texture itself is based on that part definition. So that's a really cool update there with the materials. Rex also touched on multi-materials, which is a great addition, just to show you how these are used here in the material editing tab. If I just click the multi-material button, then I can multi-select a few different materials, and I can drag those directly in. So now, previously in KeyShot 6, you could use scene sets in order to control variations. But now if you don't have a lot of geometric variation, then we can just use a multi-material to be able to toggle through these different materials in one scene. So that's another really nice addition here for KeyShot 7. So that's some of the updates on the new materials. While we're at it here, I also want to go back to kind of my camera that I had undefined here. So just this camera view over here. And let's set this to a little bit more reflective material, just because I want to show you, and something that's more neutral in color, because I want to talk to you about the updates to our environment. So our environment tab, we can now take in multiple environments. So if I multi-select, let's say I want to select a couple of these brand new interiors, then I can just drag those into my environment list. So now if I want to have multiple environments, this is going to be a lot easier for managing those environments instead of tracking down the right HDRs, EXRs, or HDZs. So these are really nice. We have updated environments for both interiors and outdoor scenes as well. And so I'll just replace this one. So if you've run into the limitations on any of the existing environments and you're not happy with the ones that you find in the cloud, then you kind of rest assured that we're going to have some new ones coming into the library for KeyShot 7, which are going to be a really welcome addition there. Additionally, a lot of work has gone into the studios, and I'll drag one of these over and I'll add it onto my list here because I want to talk. Actually, let me go into a really specific one that I'm looking for. So let's go down into the basics and let's grab this studio backdrop. backdrop here, and I'll drag it into my scene. So some changes that we've made with our environment editor. So you still have all the same settings that you had before. We do have the new addition of occlusion ground shadows, which is a really good addition. I'll show that if we've got some time a little bit later. But what you will also notice is here that with the HDRI editor, for those of you who have pro licenses, you now have direct access to the environment editor in the actual environment tab instead of having to open a new window for it. Makes a lot of sense with multiple screens, but not necessarily if you're working off of one primary display. What I really want to talk about, which is cool, is that all of the studio environments that you've been used to in KeyShot are now actually being defined by a fully procedural environment. So you'll notice that here I have these multiple environments in this one KeyShot file. When I save this KeyShot file, those environment files come with the KeyShot file. They're no longer an external HDZ or HDR or anything like that. What's also nice about these, when I mean fully procedural, that means if I go over to this overhead panel 4K, I can go to the environment editor within my environment tab, and I can start to make adjustments on these. So these are no longer just flat environments. If I want to select this environment, and let's, for example, I select this one pin, I can increase the brightness of just that pin. Or if I change the color, I can now start to modify the environment itself, right? And these, to start with, are 4K environments. I can always hit my little refresh icon to give myself the full resolution environment there. I can also actually update the environment size on the fly. So for these procedural environments, if you want to get up to 8K or 10K, all I need that up, and now I have 4 times the pixel density for this environment. So that's hugely exciting, especially when you start getting into gradients and things like that. It's a big addition. So for example, here with this 3 panels straight, or if I bring back that same studio that I had before, this studio backdrop, I can go in, I can line up my camera angle how I want it, and then I can use this, for example, this pin right here, and if I want to make that into a little bit warmer lighting, you can see that's the reflection over here coming in from the left-hand side, which means this one right here, I can intensify the cool tones, right? And so that's this cool pin right here. And so now when you start customizing your lighting, it's going to be a lot easier with the environment editor because you have all these pre-made environments. So that's pretty huge. That's a really big addition. Also, whenever you work with your environment tab, one small thing to point out, if you start defining the background as a color, right, then when I toggle to my different environments, it's going to remember that on an environment by environment basis. And this ties into the studios that Rex mentioned earlier. But the ability to really define your view here using that environment and then tie it into your cameras and your studios is pretty huge. So those are some new additions to the environment editor. So we have all new environments in the library, both procedural and image-based, as well as a bunch of new materials and some new presets. Excuse me, yeah, so more to come on that. But to change tracks a little bit, let's go ahead and open up a different scene here. So I'm just gonna open up this part right here. Let's go ahead and open this file, and we won't save the changes that were made to these. And so let's talk a little bit about textures and labels, because there's a lot of new stuff here, which is really cool. So I have right here in the scene, I just have kind of the start of a Bluetooth speaker. Another new hotkey that we've added is either Control-Alt or Command-Alt on whether you're on Mac or Windows, but that's a quick way to hide a part. So essentially what my plan is here, I have an updated material. So I just have a mesh material in the back, and then I can right click and show all parts. But what I want to do is I want to push a mesh through this anodized material that I have here. So that's one from the library. So that's really, really vibrant green with some kind of hints of blue to it as well. But what I want to do is I want to add some perforations to that. So historically, you could go into the material library and you can take one of our image-based materials that have using an opacity map and hope for the best with trying to replicate the look that you're going for. Those have all been updated with procedural textures. And the reason for that is if I just go to the opacity map, let's say I do want to define an opacity map for this material, I'll just hit my drop down, and we've really reworked both the brush and the mesh and the weave textures. For now, I want to focus in on the mesh because there is some really cool stuff in here. So for example, if I set this mesh up on this part, so now I'm using the opacity to define the transparency of this material, right? So kind of like masking in Photoshop. Here's where things start to get really cool as well, because I can define the color for my mesh. In this case, we're just using it to define the opacity, so we'll hide that for now. But two big additions that we've added in here, which make a huge difference, is I just have drop downs to determine the shape itself. So if I want to change this to a hex pattern, I can just choose hex, or if I type in if I select a circle, I have a circle. But take a look at this here. Now my diameter, I'm actually using real world units. This was modeled in millimeters, so if I type in a value of 3, that's now a 3 millimeter hole in my pattern, or on the actual shape itself here. And pattern is actually a different area. So now I can choose between preset patterns like square, a staggered pattern, or a hex pattern. So if you've tried to make these previously in a KeyShot and ran into difficulties, well, now you can just use presets and also go crazy with the custom settings so that you can define your own mesh pattern. So here, if I change my distance to something like 5 and let's zoom in, now what I'm doing is I'm determining that each of those little holes, the circles, are going to be 3 millimeters, and the distance between them is going to be 5 millimeters each. So that's pretty awesome. There's some all the materials that include a mesh in the library are created using these procedural mesh textures. There's some really cool stuff with that. One last thing I want to mention here, as far as the textures go, is let's talk really briefly about cylindrical mapping, because you can see here I've got this pretty heinous line here where I'm cutting off that texture. The reason for that is because even though this is a cylindrical shape by default, we're using box mapping. So let's take a look at our projection types, which have been updated as well. So for example, if I change this to cylinder, it's going to do some math, and I'll hit reset, and it hasn't exactly figured out what's going on here. But now what I can do is I can hit move texture, and when I do that, I can try to get this cylindrical map to fit directly to my object. This was modeled in NX, so if I know NX is Z up, so if I hit Z, now take a look at that mesh texture. This is something that would have been really difficult to do, to actually recreate previously this easily, right? So now all I had to do was fit it in the correct orientation, and you'll see the preview of what that mesh looks like in the kind of incorrect orientations. But if I zip right over to Z, you can see that's wrapping. What's really cool about this is if you can see these yellow outlines, those are the extents of the texture as I've defined them. So another thing that we've added for our textures, these procedural textures, is the ability to clip. So this is pretty awesome, because what I can do is this orange line defines essentially my bounding box for this procedural texture. What I want to do is I want to clip horizontally. So if I hit clip horizontal, you'll notice, and I'll get my move tool out of the way, is that what it's doing is it's actually trimming back that clipping area, and now I can define it using my values here. So for example, if I type in 130, what it's doing is it's giving me a bounding box for that texture. It's still wrapping seamlessly around the diameter, but vertically I've told it that past 130 millimeters, don't cut any holes in it, right? So this is really cool, because now you can go in and I don't have to model this stuff or even come up with a separate texture or unlink those materials. So this is really neat stuff. If I also clip vertical as well, you can see that now I'm clipping in a 130 by 130 millimeter square. So that's the extents that I have on this. And this is going to work for any of the procedural textures. You can always just choose to clip and image-based textures as well. So that's a new addition. That's pretty amazing. Also, you can see here that we have a lot more control with that. But I did want to mention that briefly because now you can clip and it does it intelligently. So it will only show you essentially a complete shape, whether it's a sphere or circle or square or any other pattern like that. So a lot of really exciting stuff on the texture side. Labels. Let's talk a little bit about labels. What I'll do here is I'll actually just, while we're talking about cylindrical mapping, I'll at least briefly mention a cylindrical label, because there's some stuff which was difficult to do before. So let's take a look at that. So here I'll go to my labels, and I'm just going to take the KeyShot word mark here, and I'll drag it and drop it onto my part, and I'll just add it as a label. And so one new thing whenever you're working with labels in KeyShot 7, this is a big departure from what we had in KeyShot 6. But what's not different is that you can just drag it on and click to position. Some of the stuff that is new that's really cool. So for example, right here, you can just scale your label. So now I can just reposition it just by clicking and dragging, and now it's always pointing up. And you'll notice that every texture or label has an up arrow for it. So now if I get out of position mode, I should be able to simply just rotate that as well. So it keeps the correct orientation overall, but I can position that label where I need to. This used to be a little bit more difficult of a procedure depending on your geometry. So we'll come back to this new way of projecting using planar. So planar projection is the new normal projection. But one thing I want to focus on right here while we were talking about cylindrical labels or cylindrical mapping, if I hit cylinder, right, it disappears. So I'll just, I didn't hit cylinder. There we go. Almost. Slow down, slow down. So there's our cylindrical positioning, and now let's hit reset. We can go back to move our texture, and let's set it to fit the Z, right? So now let's find it. There's our KeyShot logo. So let's say we wanted it on the back over here. I could go back to move the texture, and I can simply rotate it around my model. And you can see that projection where it shows you the actual clipping extent. So if I open up my size and mapping, again, I can just type in a value. So if I want this label to be 50 millimeters wide, and I open up my mapping tool again, you can see the extent of that label. So it's 50 millimeters by 50 millimeters. I can also control the wrap, so that the angular distance that it covers here, and the diameter is based on my geometry itself. But now if I want that to wrap 90 degrees, now it's wrapping 90 degrees. And then if I want to rotate that, I can use the angle UV. So now it's going to wrap, it's going to keep the correct projection so it won't distort. But now if I type in something like 30, right, that's going to give me the right appearance based off of my cylinder, which you can see here. So that's some really cool new updates. And just to kind of highlight this as well, let's make this repeat. So that would have been much more difficult to do in KeyShot 6. So these updates to the labels are pretty awesome, and cylindrical mapping has gotten a major revamp. So that's pretty cool. Last thing I want to talk about with labels, if I go to my Finder really quickly over here, I've got a graphic that I've pre-made, and so here are controls for the button. So I'll just drag and drop this directly onto our part. We're going to add it as a label, and if I hit Move Texture, which is what used to be the position button in KeyShot 6, you can see that I can now drag to resize, and now I'm updating here in my real-time view, which is really cool. So let's talk about sizing this thing. So same deal here. This label is 40 millimeters wide, and so if I type in 40 millimeters here, that's the one-to-one representation of that label. Additionally, if you're used to using DPI, we still will respect DPI, so either workflow is supported there. But so now it's 40 millimeters, and so it's the right size, but I'm going to have a tough time placing this right in the middle, or historically that's been the case, right? So what do we do about that? Well, now what I can do is I can expand this little icon right here, and I can show you some more controls that we have for moving and positioning my label. So if I open up the Move Texture tool, you'll notice that when I click and drag, I'm repositioning this in space. And something that was never exposed in KeyShot 6 is that we actually have geometric control over the position, the center point of our label. So that the way that this was modeled is that this needs to snap right to the center of this piece of geometry. And I can eyeball it as close as I want to right there. But additionally, if I just want to center this on the X and Y axis, I just need to type in a 0 for X, 0 for Y, hit my little green checkbox. Now my perfectly sized label is now snapping directly to the center of that face, which is exactly where it needs to be. Additionally, we can still load in bump maps and anything like that that we want to add to it. But yeah, so that's really exciting, the ability to get true kind of granular XYZ three-dimensional positioning control over your labels for both planar as well as all the other mapping types as well. So yeah, really quick overview on some of the new stuff coming in 7 as far as texturing and labels. There's much more, especially in the material graph. So I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Rex, and I think we're going to go ahead and try. If he doesn't have any kind of pressing items, we'll get into the Q&A and I'll let him lead that. So thanks for watching. To subscribe and get updates whenever we post new content, click the icon in the center of the screen. To view more quick tips and webinars, click the thumbnails below.